Strickland. I am thanks, Linnell. I am the speaker series director for the Jacksonville chapter, and Linnell's going to introduce our speaker today.
Hey, good afternoon, everyone. Just a quick Zoom etiquette. If you have any questions for our speaker, please put those in the chat as you are hearing her talk about things today. So we're not interrupting her as she's speaking. Obviously going to cover a lot of information in a short amount of time. So good afternoon, and thank you so much for giving up part of your beautiful Wednesday afternoon. I'm Linnell Feldman, the president for the local League of Women Voters, and I'm going to introduce our guest speaker today. Representative Allison Tant currently serves as the representative of District 9 in the Florida House of Representatives, covering Madison and Leon counties and parts of Jefferson. She's a native Floridian, having been born here in Jacksonville and graduated from Florida State University in 1983. She currently serves as the Democratic ranking member of the Commerce and Post-Secondary Education and Workforce subcommittees, and she also serves on the Rules, Ways and Means, and Healthcare Regulation committees. Now, while she is an elected representative of the Democratic Party, this presentation today will be nonpartisan, and it's going to discuss legislative session and procedures that'll really benefit all of us, especially as the League of Women Voters gets ready to travel to our state's capital for lobby days on the 7th and 8th of March. So, ma'am, having said that, the Zoom floor is yours, and thank you for joining us.
Wonderful. It's great to be with you all. As my introducer said, I am a native of Jacksonville. I was born in Baptist Hospital, not on the side of the St. Johns River, and graduated from Fletcher High School in 1979. My sister lives in Nocatee, and I went to church with Laura. So Laura and I were at Neptune Baptist Church every Sunday morning, Sunday evening, and Wednesday night services, and then everything in between. So we go back a long way, and Jacksonville is always going to be a dear place to me. So I am a Democrat, but the things I'm going to talk about today go across all of this situation and how to best advocate in the Capitol. And one of the things I tell people when they're coming to visit the Capitol is to appreciate what you bring to the table and realize that you know more about some of the subjects you're going to discuss than any of the elected officials do. I tell you that because it's easy to be intimidated by this. It's also easy to feel rushed through a doorway. And remember, I'm going to tell you what I say to that is that these folks asked to be in those chairs, and they have an obligation to listen to you when you're there, I think, because they asked you for their help, for your help to get them there. So do not feel like you're imposing, and don't feel nervous about talking about what you care about, because that is literally our jobs, is to listen, to learn, and to the best of our abilities, bring your voices to the table in conversation. One thing you don't want to do is lie or maybe give information that's not accurate. If you don't know an answer to something, that's okay. Just say, I don't know, but we will get back to you. And then most definitely do get back. They count on that. The easiest way to lose an issue is to not follow up on something when you've been asked a question you don't know the answer to, because they're going to forget, or they're going to say, well, they never got back to me, so it must not have been important. So that's kind of the mindset that we're dealing. We are getting ready to face, session starts next week. I'm glad you're coming early. We're getting ready to face an onslaught of issues. And I say that because we've had 6 weeks of meetings and committee meetings and a special session over the last 2 months. And a second special session in December. So we've actually had 2 special sessions since we were all elected in November, and then 6 weeks of committee hearings. What we've done in these committee hearings is next to nothing. I'm just going to be straight with you about that. We have had many presentations, and some of that is really important because we've got a bunch of new members in the legislature who need to learn the scope of what their committees have say-so over. But but because of all these presentations, we have not heard a lot of bills. So we are getting ready to, I think, walk into Tuesday with it's going to be machine gun alley, one bill flying after the other, after the other, after the other. And there's going to be very little time for feedback from constituents. So under current rules of the House, we get 48 hours notice of when a bill is going to be heard. That is by rule of the Florida House of Representatives, and it is a long-standing rule. So we as legislators don't necessarily know what bills are going to be heard until 48 hours prior to hearing. That means if you as a citizen have a problem with the bill, you need language, or you want to amend a bill, you have a very short window for getting it done. And then you have to do it through a legislator to get it done. So your relationships with your legislators matter a whole lot, so that you can actually call somebody and say, this is a really bad bill for the people in your district, and I need you to know how we feel about it so you can address it and then tell them what you want. Later during the session, that goes down to a 24-hour notice. And then for appropriations meetings, which is the meetings that related to budget matters, it's a 2-hour rule. So it is a very dynamic, fluid process, and it is a must be present to win game, though it's not a game. Real lives are impacted by everything that goes on. And so it is pressure packed, and it is extremely fast paced. And so that's why your relationships with your House members and your Senate members are really critical. So I'm glad that you all are involved in all of this. I will tell you that in one of my committees, I went to the chair of the committee last week, and I said, listen, I've got a bill that I'd like to get heard. It's non-controversial. It's going to allow the state of Florida to recognize art therapists who provide all these services to trauma children, people incarcerated, people in therapy, you know, all this stuff. And he said, well, let me just tell you, we've got 4 committee meetings, Allison. One is going to be dedicated solely to gender care. One is going to be dedicated to women's health issues. And the other 2 are the only 2 committees, those 2-hour blocks where we're going to hear bills. So essentially, if you don't have your bill in position to roll through committee fast, without controversy, without amendment, you're probably not going to have your bill heard. And also, if your bill has like a committee reference in, say, children and families, and then they're also going to have to come to this healthcare reg committee, there's a very strong chance you're not going to get your second bill hearing because of the way this is going to be done. So that is just one committee. And I suspect that is, and he says, we're looking at a very big traffic jam, because we've got bills. I mean, bill drafting deadline, ladies, is not until Monday. I mean, bill filing deadline is not until Tuesday, rather. So consequently, we don't even have, and so once you file a bill, then it's got to be reviewed by staff and then referenced to a committee. So I don't see how this session's going to be a pressure cooker, is what I'm telling you. So just so you know that. And the social issues are going to be, everything's going to lean towards them, because it is a demonstration project for a presidential run, whether you good, bad, or indifferent, but that's what we're dealing with here. And so it's just going to be hard to figure out how we're going to get through this next 60 days, but we will. We always do. And we do have a requirement for a balanced budget in Florida that is constitutionally required. In fact, we could pass no legislation all session long except for that budget, and we will have done the job that the Constitution requires of us. So we could literally do nothing but the budget and leave. So to that end, that's kind of the big picture item. As you know, there's 120 House Representatives members, and there are 40 Senate members. I have 6 committees, and I'm grateful that I have those committees. I work really hard, and most of my colleagues do as well. And then my goal is to make sure that when there are issues at the table, when I know they have a direct impact on my constituents, to make sure my constituents know and are part of the process. And then if I don't know if there's a direct impact, figure that out before I got to vote on it. So those are the things that I work on. And of course, I've got 3 colleges in my area, actually 4, because I have two to state colleges and to universities. So, because I had North Florida College is in Madison. And then, so I've got a lot of higher ed issues coming up and also workforce issues that I'm focused on. And then, of course, we're going to have, I'm on the healthcare reg committee, where we're going to see a lot of stuff over there. So there's a lot brewing. There's a lot brewing this session. So is that kind of the overview you were looking for, ladies?
Well, yes. I do want to ask you this, because you talked about, I think you called it a machine gun kind of impact, but there is a supermajority in the Senate of 28 Republicans and 12 Democrats, and in the House there are 84 Republicans.
85. Well, 80, well, yeah, there's 84 because we have an open seat, right?
Okay, the vacant seat, yes, ma'am. And 35 Democrats. So how, and this is not about political parties, this is about numbers here. But how do constituents really feel motivated, or how do we entice people to still participate in the process here? Because a lot of people think this is just going to be a steamroll, where, like you're saying, they're not going to be listening to amendments on things that don't align with party politics.
Well, I don't think it's not that. What he said is because we're only going to have 2 committee hearings. If a bill gets bogged down in any stretch of the imagination, it's dead. So it's not that he didn't say, it's not those amendments. So for the art therapy bill, for example, that I'm pushing, there's no controversy with that. I don't think I'm going to have any amendments, but I don't know if I won't. But if I do, he's like, we don't want anybody to talk. We don't want to hear from anybody, because we got so many bills to roll through that it'll kill the chance of somebody else's bill being heard. So that's that. In terms of the steamroll, it is a steamroll. I'm not going to deny that it is not. I mean, my job as a member of the minority party is to raise the issues, work behind the scenes as much as I can with the committee chairs, with leadership, to make sure that the issues that people have brought to me are heard. And I do that pretty regularly on the education bill, in particular, the voucher bill. I am not anti-school choice by any stretch of the imagination, but what I am, because I did that with my own son. I have some with developmental disabilities, and he was in public school, a response to intervention school, and then back to public schools, and when it was when he graduated from that one. And then my son Jonathan was in a charter school for a little while, and then back to public schools. But what I'm concerned about with this bill is that I'm trying to figure out the business model, and I've raised this issue. You raised this issue. So, but first of all, what I talked about with that, when I went to leadership on the bill, I said, first of all, 35% of students come back to public school in the first year. 61% are back in public school after the second year. 75% are back after the third year. I got to have them something to come back to. That's the thing I want, is I got to have something. So we got to very well fund these things so that there's something standing to come back to if you need to. That particularly happens in the disability community more so than probably any other part, because as much as some of our folks really want to serve our people, and we have some really good ones who can and do, the vast majority can't. And it just is what it is. And I've faced that myself. So I just need something good for our folks to come back to. And then the other thing, but I actually was speaking to the analyst on this, who's writing the bill. And she said, like, you could literally have 3 public schools in your area, and you might like the football team on one, the band on the other, and a social studies class in the third. And you could literally go to all 3 schools under this new model. That's great, except for how does the business model, how do you cover the costs of payroll, overhead, the physical location, and then like upkeep, much less the classroom supplies? So I have a lot of questions about that. And how do we, especially if you're setting up your own school, how the heck how do you come up with a model for that? And the whole thought was, well, kids would go into virtual school the rest of the time. Well, I mean, my daughter just got out of virtual COVID school, and the resiliency is not there for our young people. So I just want to make sure we're not forgetting that mental health piece while we're in the middle of all this. So I raise those kind of issues. I don't throw bombs. I try really hard not to just get into partisan bomb throwing, because nobody's going to listen to that. So I try to raise issues in a non, emotionally charged manner to help folks think through the things that we're going to be talking through. And in my view on this one, in my words on this one, it has been only from my own life experience. And then the fact that in Tallahassee, I am probably the go-to for most families here when they are struggling, when their school is not providing them help with their disabled loved one. And then I go help them figure out what they do. And when they do return to public school, their kids are usually a good 2 years behind academically by the time they get back. So
Ma'am, I do want to ask a question of you then, because you've touched on something that has been really highlighted within the league here the last few weeks, especially is, we've been following the Florida Policy Institute, and we've been looking at the amount of dollars that they're assigning to how much they think this is going to cost in the first year or so. And we keep seeing this $4 billion. B is billion.
Mm-hmm.
That is a lot. But there's this this vulnerable population of students. You talk about children with different academic or physical abilities or barriers that they're dealing with. And there's a concern that some of these parents may be thinking that they're going to take their child out of a K through 12 public school and put them in a private or charter school. And they do not always have to meet the same standards for ADA compliance or some of the services that they offer.
That is correct. And further, I had a whole conversation with the bill sponsor on this as well as staff. I'm like, so first of all, when your child goes into public school, my son was an ESE child from K to 22 years old. So from the first day he walked in the door, actually pre-K until he finished school at 22. So I've lived this. So when you go to a public school, first of all, the public schools have to take all comers. They don't get to send anybody away. You have to. Public schools have to have certified teachers. Public schools have to have transparency. An IEP is a legally binding document between a parent and the school for how their child's going to be best served. So consequently, when you leave that public school with your IEP and go to a charter or voucher school, there is no obligation by that private voucher or charter school to honor that IEP, period. There's no legal requirement. They don't even have to look at it, and most times they don't. Then when they return back to the public school, more times than not, or if they've gone from the private entity to the public school, there's zero documentation as to what is needed. So and then that's the disability population. So last year, one of my counties is Jefferson County. Their entire school district was taken over by a charter school entity. It was Somerset, and I got them back under a public school local control. And when even people who thought the charter school system was good had no idea that they didn't have to have licensed teachers, certified teachers. The other concern that I have about, so that there's a whole, and people just don't know that. They don't know, and there's also no transparency. There's no school grades. So what I have talked to staff about on this bill is when a parent is shopping, and I'm going to tell you, I've been that parent, feeling very alone, feeling like my child was not being best served, feeling like my child was forgotten in a classroom, wanting a solution desperately, wanting for him to have a chance at a better future that I don't, as a non-educator, know what to do with, being very afraid, and I'm going to tell you, you can have your act together. You can be a corporate nanny, a doctor, or anybody else with all kind of degrees and what have you. But when it comes to your kid, you're just like everybody else, right? You don't have any other than knowing your own child. You don't have any more bells and whistles than anybody else. And so when they began to railroad my child, I was desperate for a solution. And what happens is a lot of times some of these schools prey on us parents because we're scared and they're vulnerable and they know it. And I think some of them, the well-meaning ones, mean to or think they can actually provide the services until they figure out once the child is there that they can't. And then they send the children back. I'll tell you that we started a whole classic academy charter school here. They enrolled a bunch of kids with disabilities and sent them all home. because they just couldn't do it. And that's okay. But parents need to know that. And what I'm concerned about is that when a parent is shopping, there's not going to be a standard over here is not going to be the same as the standard over there, right? An apple over here is not going to be an apple over there, an orange and an orange, because there's no rules, there's no standards, there's no requirements for even transparency. For right now, if you wanted to choice and go to a different public school in your community, you could go on the DOE website. You could say this school is an A school, this school is an A school, this school has this many teachers, this how many. So like there's none of that in this system. And so that's another issue I have raised. And so again, but it is our tax dollars. And so if you think about that model I just described to you, and let's say there's $8,000 a student that follows the student, and your student wants to go, and like in Tallahassee, Childs has a really great football team. Leon High School has this rock star steel drum band. Rickard's IB program has off the chain social studies classes. So what if a kid wants to do all three of those? Under this model, they can. So then that FEFP gets carved up. And then the rest of the time it's virtual school, or if that. And so like, how do you plan for that? Like in business, I mean, even in your household planning, like you've got to be able to budget. Right. So it's just I keep raising these issues. And I guess the answer is, well, we're going to throw $4 billion at it and figure it out.
So I have a question. You mentioned about the vouchers and, the scholar shop that some folks are familiar with. I want to talk about the marketing and media firm, Step Up for Students. Will all of these vouchers go through Step Up for Students?
I don't know. I don't exactly know how the money flow is going to work, because but I probably need to look at that, because when I was having these initial conversations, they weren't sure. But my suspicion is yes, it'll go through Step Up for Students, because they're the opportunity scholarships and the Hope scholarships, and yes,
right.
So.
They get 3% of whatever the cost of the voucher is for everyone that they process. So if they're worth $8,000 and they process 20,000 of these. Wow, I may need to retire from my day job and go work there. Seems like they're going to be doing pretty good.
When Jeremy was a McKay scholarship student at the response to intervention school that we went to, for his matrix score, we got $11,000 for his education. We paid $7,000 on top of it. So this $8,000 is not the end of what a parent's going to have to pay. And further, in some of your premier high schools, private schools, like in my area, it's McClay School and Holy Comforter, parents will be able to use their FEFP dollars there, whether there's a disability or not, whether they've been in that school since their children started pre-K and they've never used the dollars for that. So what that's going to end up doing, I think, is take those dollars that really are meant for struggling students who want options outside of where they are, and basically be used over here. There's not going to be seats for them, because these kids aren't going to be able to get into the school if there's no seats. So the kids who are looking for opportunities are not going to have them either. So I'm just concerned about how this is all going to wash out, and it's going to be a hot mess for a little while.
Yes, ma'am. I wanted to shift the focus just a little bit, if you don't mind, to talk about permitless carry. Just like you and the league, we're not anti-charter school or anything like that. We're also not anti-gun or anti-gun owner. We are pro-safety for the greater good of the public. So I just, if you could tell us your thoughts on the permitless carry and what you think might happen there.
Well, I think it's going to pass. What I think is going to happen is, well, first of all, I'm not anti-gun either. I grew up in North Florida. My dad had guns. We had a shotgun, although I couldn't have told you, and I bet Leanne, my sister, couldn't either, where he kept the gun, nor did I know where he kept the ammunition. I also know we had a handgun because I saw it under the front seat of the car on family trips, but I never knew we had one, and I never saw it except for that one time. So my dad was probably the epitome of what a responsible gun owner should look like, with children in the house, so I was one of the lucky ones. And my grandmother, who grew up in the country in North Carolina, she kept a gun behind her bedroom door. So I was like, this is the greatest thing ever. This woman's ready for anything. So I am not anti-gun. However, I do have grave concerns about the permitless carry bill. And I'm planning to vote against it. The reason I'm concerned about it is that, first of all, I have 4 colleges in my district, and we know that, when the other states that have actually instituted permitless carry have seen an uptick in crime. There's an uptick in road rage. There's an uptick in theft. There's an uptick in assault with guns. Furthermore, in rural areas, because of access to guns, there's a higher incident of suicide among rural humans when they have that access to gun. And in fact, I was at a health briefing in Jefferson County a couple of weeks ago, and the issue of suicide came up, and I asked the question, how many of these suicides in this county in the last year were due to gun violence? 100%. 100% of the suicides were gun violence. So I am very concerned. The permitless carry is one way to describe it. The other one is there will be no requirement for training. No, and what I said, the answer to that I've heard back on that, well, some of these trainings aren't good. They're just not good trainings. You just go to a hotel lobby and nothing happens. So then let's address that. Let's make those trainings better. And I've heard, and the other argument is, well, the good guys, they can't get the gun. Well, the good guys can get a gun. They can go get a permit. There's a process for that. You don't know who's good and who's bad until they've had the background screening. And I'm very concerned about the red flags, that have kept school violence down to a minimum, school shootings down to a minimum. I'm very about those things going away, about domestic violence. People with domestic violence charges, not, right now you can't get a gun. So I want to make sure those things stay intact, but I suspect that but I will tell you that so we have 3 schools of thought. We have people who want nothing. We have people who want the permitless carry. And then we have a whole lot of people who want open carry. Law enforcement does not want open carry. And the reason they don't want open carry is because when people wear a gun outside their clothes, they're concerned that they'll be the first targets by someone who wants to do damage. And that is often a police officer. So those are but that bill, I believe, is going to be on the floor next week in the House of Representatives. So get ready.
I think one of the things that people also overlook is the current process that we have when people submit for a concealed carry permit is the number of folks who have been denied one
Right.
because of domestic violence or because of
Threats to schools. Think about the number of people. Yeah.
But we also have folks who have had theirs revoked because of domestic violence, DUIs, and a number of other things. So the process that we have, although not perfect, it seems like it may have been for the greater good of society, at least what we have. And I think you're right about
and after Parkland and the students that were killed, the red flag laws that we put in place have demonstrated, safety for our other school children, and other states have looked at what we've done to try to emulate. And now we're going to get rid of all of it. Oh, and the diversity, equity, inclusion bill is going to be up in my post-secondary ed and workforce committee on Tuesday of next week. That's House Bill 999. That's the Black history teaching and all that.
Well, that's going to be popular, I would imagine.
I suppose. So
yeah. Do you want to talk a little bit about it?
Just, well, obviously. So what first of all, I think it's horrifically unnecessary and really criminal to erase the history of what our citizens have lived through to get to where we are right now. Black, brown, white, Asian, all of it. We all need to know what's happened. So what is it they say, when you don't learn your history, you're doomed to repeat it? So we don't want to do that. And then the other thing about that bill is when you look at diversity, inclusion, and equity, sometimes you're throwing, if it's really, you've got to look at what all these entities are doing. I can tell you, Florida State University, for example, has an amazing program for veterans who've returned from active duty. That's an inclusion, and that's an equity program. They've got a program for foster children who've lived their whole lives in foster care, first in and among anybody that ever known to go to college, it is a foster care. That is an inclusion program, including people with disabilities at your colleges and universities. That is an inclusion program. So it's wider spread than it seems on the surface when you think of it only as a Black history issue. But that is the most, frankly, egregious of the things that bill does. But that's coming up next week. So I'm actually going to be, when we hang up here, I got to get on calls about that. So
I wanted to ask,
Allison,
I'm sorry.
I was going to ask, so many of these bills, or the ones that were passed in the last session, or some of the things that the governor signed, were challenged in the courts and have to be defended. And some of them, you know, are lost, and then he goes to appeal. And this costs so much money.
It's costing all of us. It's costing all of us a lot of money, and the lawsuits are not going to stop. And the fact of the matter is, the governor does not care. The Republican Party folks, or the people that are getting these playbooks from, just want the laws passed. It doesn't matter if they're ever implemented. And that is just the strategy for messaging. To tell you the truth, it's really about the messaging, and that's about it. So it's not really necessarily about the implementation so much as it is the messaging. And by the way, we're going to have, I don't know if you've seen, but there's going to be a bunch of elections bills coming. So we have only begun to see a few things come out, but there's going to be more. There's going to be a whole lot more. And by the way, in Leon County, and I don't know if you all have talked to your SOE, but in Leon County, at the height of COVID, which is completely understandable because it was COVID, we had 67,000 vote by mail applications on file. Then after the session after COVID, we went down to like 33,000 vote by mail voters. And then after the last, because of some laws that we changed that year, and then last year, the laws that we changed have now led to 0 vote by mail voters. And so our SOE has sent out a letter and an email asking people to sign back up, and I think we're back up to 8,000. But 8,000 vote by mail voters versus 67,000 vote by mail voters is a huge divide. So that's something we all need to be focused on.
We have 2 proactive supervisors of elections because we cover 4 counties. 2 are a little slow to the start. But I wanted to ask you, man, what do you think is going to become of the broader public support for constitutional revisions and amendments? Do you think that we will actually see that pass, where it will require 66.67% of voters to vote in favor of an amendment to pass? They've got
the numbers to get it through this year. I voted against it last year. I voted against it this year, and I voted. So I don't know how it's going to go yet. It just depends on how much time we've got to push things through. To tell you the truth, the question is, do we do it this year or next? I wouldn't take my eye off of it.
I want to do a little bit of hopefulness here. Is there something positive that you see that will come out of this legislative session?
Well, one of the things that always gets lost, because these big ticket items get all the attention, is the work that can get done and does get done on behalf of regular Floridians. I've been lucky and I'm to be able to pass bills for my first. I passed 5 bills my first term, which is pretty unusual for a freshman and also extremely unusual for a Democrat. And I really focus on things that help people, and that and I work the process. But you know, there are some good things. I mean, we just did some hurricane stuff for the citizens down in Lee and Charlotte. So we did some of that during the special session. And there are almost always a few bills that pass that are just really good bills for human beings. So I can keep Laura posted on some of those. So, but I mean, and the budget's always, you know, we often get good things done through the budget. We're just in a phase right now. The pendulum always swings, but we have to stay at the table, and we have to stay at the course, and we have to stay involved in the process. And so what you're doing is really important, and I encourage you to stay doing it. So.
All right. Home rule. Let's talk just a little bit about home rule. So, you know, the Republican Party has the supermajority, and this has been in the past.
There's going to be a lot of preemption. You just wait. There's going to be a whole lot of preemption bills, and so that's coming. So you just need to, Voice your
Right.
voice.
I was going to say they used to be the party of less government, and we didn't want to see home rule trampled, and now it seems like that may have gone by the wayside in a number of ways.
It has, for sure. So,
All right. If anyone has any questions, now would be the time to ask. Otherwise, we're gonna.
yeah, come by my office next week, 329 Capitol. So when you're there, come on by.
I don't have any questions that have been posted in the chat for you, but the only thing we didn't talk about, and we kind of touched on it, is the money for students that is typically given to the public schools, and then the voucher defers it over to the charter school.
Yeah.
All right, so we've heard headlines that it's gonna, if you want to homeschool your child, then it's gonna go to the parent.
Yes, I heard that. Yes, that is a concern. And I'll tell
Is
you.
there, well, I mean, I just know that there are a lot of people that are concerned that if you have parents that are not being upright parents, that are thinking, oh, I can get some money.
Right. That is a concern. I think it's a legitimate concern. I think as one of the chief duties, and I've stated this on the House floor, one of the chief duties that we all have as legislators, no matter what party we're from, no matter what part of the state we're from, no matter who we represent, is to be a fierce guardian of the public trust and the public dollar, and having a very clear line of accountability and transparency with how those dollars are spent. The integrity of those dollars has to be there. I'm very concerned about that. One of the other things that I was mentioning this last night at a town hall, I started a scholarship several years ago for students with disabilities. And the way we worked it was that the money, we awarded a scholarship to a child to go on to post-secondary learning of their choice and capability, but they had to, in order to draw down their dollars, send us a class registration and an invoice for payment of those classes. And we would then cut the check to the school, never to the family. And so we would still get families that call us up and say, where's my money? And I'm like, you don't get money for being alive. You get money for going to college, and we pay the college. So go ahead and get me the invoice. There's got to be some checks and balances in that. I'm not going to be happy with that. I'm not going to be comfortable with that. And frankly, no Floridian should. None.
Exactly.
So, yeah, well, I have to bump off to the next thing, but y'all please come and visit me in the Capitol, and please bring your voices. You bring so much of regular women, regular family, regular people's views to the table that are often shouted down, and we need you more than ever. So.
Ma'am, thank you for making time for us today. We realize you have a tight schedule, and we hope to see you next week while we're in the Capitol.
Oh, good. Please do. Take care.